Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a stack of sources here detailing, well, one of the most stunning paradoxes in modern business, really. And our mission today is to cut through all the noise and figure out what exactly is going on. We are diving deep into Novo Nordisk. Now, if you've been following business or even medical news lately, you definitely know the name. They're the pharma giant behind Ozempic and that blockbuster weight loss drug, Wegovy. I mean, they're currently one of the most valuable companies in Europe, riding this huge GLP-1 wave to some incredible success. By all accounts, they are absolutely winning right now. So here's the paradox we need to solve for you. Why, right at the peak, the absolute peak of their success, is Novo Nordisk doing this massive, sweeping restructuring? We're talking about cutting 9,000 jobs globally. It just seems completely counterintuitive. But, our sources don't just confirm the cuts. They actually argue this kind of, well, brutal strategic shift is completely necessary.
It really is. It's like a proactive corporate amputation almost. And the scale of change under their new CEO, Mike Dowstar, that's what really jumped out at me from the reading. I mean, we're not talking about just trimming a bit of fat from some failing side project. This is a deliberate, huge cut. 9,000 people. That's, what, 11 to 12% of their whole global workforce? About
Right.
78,400 employees total. Yeah, analysts are calling it a necessary pivot, strategically necessary. It signals that even with these amazing sales for their core drugs, the competitive environment, the sheer speed of the market, it's at a boiling point. The current structure is just too slow, too complex maybe, to keep that leadership position.
Okay, right. Let's try and unpack this then, starting with the financial side, because these immediate numbers are frankly shocking, both the pain and the predicted gain. First off, the job cuts themselves. They're hitting their home base, Denmark, really hard, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right.
The sources specify that out of the 9,000 global layoffs, something like 5,000 are happening right there in Denmark. That's just a massive hit to their core operations, their R&D base.
And those deep cuts, they're aimed at a single, very sharp financial target, saving 8 billion Danish kroners every year by the end of 2026.
8 billion DKK. To give you a sense, that's roughly, what, 1.3 billion US dollars saved annually? That shows some serious commitment to efficiency.
It does. But here's where the immediate financial bit gets really, really interesting. And it shows just how certain management must be about the strategy. The sources point out that the estimated runtime cost of the restructuring—
You mean severance, overhauls, fees, all that?
Exactly. Severance packages, system changes, legal fees.
Mm.
That cost is also around 8 billion Danish kroner.
Wait, hang on. Help me understand that. You're saying they're spending the same amount they hope to save annually just to make the cuts happen in the first place?
Precisely. They're taking an immediate painful hit of about $1.3 billion up front just to achieve that $1.3 billion in annual savings starting, a couple of years down the line in 2027.
Wow.
It's a huge immediate investment in future efficiency. It really shows the board must see the current way of operating as, well, financially unsustainable given the competition. Even though they're pulling in billions right now, they're picking future agility over today's profit margins, essentially.
That is a massive gamble. You take all the pain now, betting the savings kick in just as things stabilize, and hoping the disruption doesn't just wreck the pipeline in the meantime. And we saw that disruption hit their guidance immediately, didn't we?
We did.
They pulled back expectations sharply. Sources highlight the company revised its operating profit growth guidance down for 2025. They were aiming for a pretty optimistic 10 to 16% growth.
Very optimistic.
And now they're telling the market, expect something more like 4 to 10%, much more conservative. The market's definitely pricing in that short-term turbulence.
And that new focus, that discipline, it extends beyond just layoffs. It affects everyone who's staying. The message is clear. This isn't just about saving cash. It's about control. It's about performance. The sources mention two other big company-wide things that really underscore this new culture under the CEO.
Okay, like what?
Well, first, there's an immediate global hiring freeze for any non-critical roles. Basically, if it's not directly tied to protecting or growing that core GLP-1 business, the position's on ice.
Right, focus.
And second, they've mandated a return-to-office policy, RTO, starting next January. Now, they say there'll be some flexibility worked out between managers and employees. But shifting from the recent, remote work flexibility to this enforced RTO, it's a strong signal. Management's tightening the reins on operations, pushing a performance culture right after the cuts.
So, okay, we know the what now. A $1.3 billion cost for a $1.3 billion annual return, 9,000 jobs gone, a new culture of strict discipline, hiring freeze, RTO.
Yeah.
But it still feels like a huge overreaction for a company that's, dominating its field right now. Help me bridge that gap. Why? Why does a company earning billions need such, frankly, brutal cuts? Where's the actual pressure coming from?
It seems to boil down to a fundamental realization inside the company. The market for obesity and diabetes drugs, it's changed. It went from being this kind of gold rush to a grinding, hyper-competitive war zone almost overnight. And Novo Nordisk is facing these twin threats that mean they have to become leaner, faster, surgically lean, really.
And the sources are pretty clear about these two threats, which are actually quite different from each other.
They are.
On one side, you've got the classic rival, right?
Yeah.
The big one, Eli Lilly.
Yep.
Huge pharmaceutical giant. They're neck and neck, launching competing treatments, applying that top-tier pressure, fighting for every insurance contract, every market share point globally.
That's the traditional high-stakes pharma battle.
Yeah.
But the second threat, that's the real game changer, I think. And it's probably why this restructuring feels so urgent, so maybe drastic. We're talking about unexpected, massive pressure from compounding pharmacies, particularly in the U.S.
Ah, right. Explain that a bit. How does that work?
Well, it's a bit of a regulatory loophole, essentially. When a branded drug like Ozempic or Wegovy faces, say, manufacturing shortages, which they have, these compounding pharmacies, are legally allowed to create custom, non-branded versions of the active ingredient, semaglutide in this case,
And they can sell it cheaper.
often at a fraction of the cost, because they bypass almost all the massive infrastructure costs Novo Nordisk has.
Yeah.
Billions spent on R&D, huge clinical trials, FDA approval processes, marketing. The compounders don't have that burden for these specific shortage situations.
So that's where the pricing pressure really hits them. They spend billions to justify their price, and these pharmacies can just undercut them massively using a regulatory feature designed for shortages. That's crippling.
Precisely. And the sources show this dual pressure. You've got Lilly at the top demanding constant expensive innovation, and then these compounding alternatives just sucking revenue out from the bottom. It's led to slower sales growth than expected for their key drugs, especially Wegovy in the U.S., it seems. So the company's stated goal, according to the sources, is to simplify its structure, speed up decision-making, and reduce complexity. Their current size, their current setup, it just makes them too slow to react to this kind of fast-moving market threat.
So the strategy isn't retreat, it's consolidation. Intense focus, a total strategic realignment, really. The sources keep saying Novo Nordisk is aggressively doubling down on obesity and diabetes,
That's the phrase they use.
which signals, okay, resources are getting pulled out of anything considered non-core. Research, support functions, it's all being redirected purely into defending and expanding that GLP-1 dominance.
And that pivot, that doubling down, it raises the single most important question, I think, for the company's long-term future. Can you actually gain that financial agility, that focus, without losing vital depth? I mean, you simply cannot cut 12% of a highly specialized workforce without creating enormous internal turbulence.
Yeah, the internal risks must be huge.
Definitely. The sources cite the loss of institutional knowledge as a big one. Layoffs, plus that hiring freeze. It inevitably means losing key people, specialized managers, especially in functions outside those newly prioritized core areas. Think about, say, rare disease research or specific niche cardiovascular projects they might have had.
And that's the $1.3 billion trade-off right there, isn't it? They're betting that the increased speed and efficiency they gain will outweigh losing that R&D diversity, that accumulated knowledge.
The big bet.
Because pharma innovation, it's a long game. It's expensive. It's complex. It's built on deep, deep institutional knowledge. If they save $1.3 billion a year, but those cuts slow down or kill off early-stage research in areas that aren't GLP-1, well, they might be sacrificing the next blockbuster, the thing that takes over when GLP-1 drugs eventually inevitably peak or face even more competition. So the critical question we need to watch, really, is exactly which therapeutic areas are getting deprioritized. How dramatically will those R&D budgets shift away from exploring diverse areas and just pour into intense specialization? And you also have to think about the cultural fallout. Beyond just the raw numbers, this restructuring introduces a massive layer of disruption. Ongoing projects get complicated. Execution slows down, potentially. Plus, you've got the anxiety, the morale of the people who remain. That combination, mass cuts, a hiring freeze, a mandatory return to office, it creates an immediate, intense performance culture. And the risk of voluntary departures among really specialized, talented people, That's just as real as the involuntary cuts. Talented people don't always stick around to see where the axe might fall next.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings us to the external factors, the things they can't control, but which will determine if this massive gamble pays off.
Right.
Analysts are watching first the competition, obviously. What's Eli Lilly's next move? How do they respond? And crucially, what happens with the regulators and the patent situation around those compounding pharmacies? If that loophole somehow gets tightened or closed, Novo Nordisk suddenly gets a huge boost. If it stays wide open, well, the pressure to cut costs even further might just keep escalating.
And secondly, there's the financial mechanics. The market needs to see that the 8 billion DKK in annual savings actually shows up quickly, smoothly, and without significantly damaging the growth of Wegovy and Ozempic in the process. Look, the sources strongly suggest this restructuring is necessary. It's framed as a move of radical, proactive defense against these market forces, but the enormous scale, it poses real risks to internal cohesion, to R&D speed and breadth. The ultimate judgment on CEO Dalsdar's leadership here will really be whether this extreme financial discipline manages to foster the right kind of innovation or if it ends up stifling it in the long run.
Okay, so let's bring this home. We started with this paradox. Arguably, the world's hottest pharma company, the clear champion in a massive market cutting 9,000 jobs. The central tension, and this should probably be the key takeaway for you listening, is this. In high-stakes business today, success doesn't buy you stability. Not anymore. It actually guarantees brutal, swift competition. Novo Nordisk's own incredible success basically created the conditions where rivals like Lilly had to respond aggressively, and where pricing pressures could skyrocket through things like compounding pharmacies. So they're doing these mass layoffs not because they failed, but almost because they succeeded so wildly. They now need this radical realignment just to defend their lead against a market that's moving faster than their current structure can apparently handle.
And that leads us straight into the final provocative thought here. This isn't just a story about Novo Nordisk or even just pharma. It's really a story about scale and speed in any high-stakes, innovative sector today. Think about tech, AI, advanced medicine. When a market moves as incredibly fast as the GLP-1 sector has, driven by these huge breakthroughs, can a massive, complex, heavily regulated company like Novo Nordisk really achieve the radical agility it needs to stay ahead? Or does this kind of massive, painful restructuring inevitably compromise the deep, complex institutional knowledge? The kind you absolutely need for meticulous quality control, for compliance, for navigating multi-year regulatory pathways. Ponder this. If that efficiency, that speed, comes at the expense of deep knowledge and maybe careful process, is that short-term win worth the long-term risk? The risk of a regulatory slip-up down the line, or maybe missing the next big innovation because you cut too deep?